everyone. Welcome back to Is Told by Zink with your host, Samantha. I'm in studio with Michael. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're visiting LA?
I am.
From New York?
From New York. No longer New York City. I live in upstate New York now, which is about like 2.5 hours north of the city. And
that's not upstate New York. You know, I'm actually from upstate New York.
Are you like Rochester, Buffalo,
Syracuse.
New York? Yeah, that's actually upstate New York. Whenever I say upstate New York in front of someone like you, You're like, actually, you might as well be in New York City. But for a New York City kid like me, that's like as far upstate as I go. But yeah, we live upstate, and I grew up in Manhattan. I spent my whole life in New York City for the most part. And about 4 years ago, when all the craziness went down, my wife and I were like, we've got these two little kids, school's going to virtual. One of them is 2, one of them is 5. Like, we're not going to put our kids in a virtual school. And so we had a house upstate, we moved upstate, and it was honestly like arguably the best decision we've made.
You could breathe, finally.
We can breathe. We also have we went from like a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom, 1,600 square foot apartment in Brooklyn to 55 acres. And,
No, I feel that. I moved here from New York during the pandemic.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, I was one of those. They're like, oh, if you leave New York, don't come back. I'm like, see ya. And then I came to LA. And do you feel like when you moved, things started aligning more in your life? Like you were meant to leave New York to be in this like next chapter?
You know, I have like an interesting story with New York. So I spent the majority of my life in restaurants, working in restaurants. And so I started working in restaurants when I was 12, and I worked in restaurants as like a technician until I was 28 when I opened up my first restaurant. And, the restaurant business really kind of like runs through my veins. And it's a really tough business. But if you can do it in New York, if you figure out a system to actually pull it off in New York, it's like a wonderful thing. It's like really like having a successful restaurant in New York City is amazing because you get to connect with so many people. Everybody's like coming to your place to actually brighten their day. There's a lot of people in New York, so like there's like 8 million people that live in New York City, and there's 25,000 restaurants.
Yeah, that's
and
crazy.
So like when the pandemic hit, I was like I was literally ready to open up my 3rd restaurant concept, and it all went down, and I had to completely pivot my life. And so I was like, wait a second, like, is this like my calling to take a step back from the world of restaurants? And that's what I did. But, we moved upstate. I had given myself a 6-month period of time to really kind of figure out what it was I wanted to do. And I did. And I figured out my next step, which is Kreatures of Habit. And
that's awesome.
Yeah.
You needed to just reset, reevaluate.
Well, honestly, if the pandemic hadn't hit, I probably would still be living in Brooklyn running, a restaurant concept. And so this new lifestyle it's not that it's hard, but the freedom that I have in this business is just far greater than I ever thought I could have, because I always thought that I was going to be a restaurateur.
Yeah, and I did my research, and I saw the Meatball shop. I had no idea, by the way. I'm from New York City.
Have you been in the Meatball shop?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Honestly, when I was dating in my 20s, every guy would bring me to the Meatball shop.
Let's go. Meatball shop. That's it. First datums.
I forgot about the Meatball shop since I've been here since 2021, and I did forget about the Meatball shop. And I was doing my research on you, and I was like, no fucking way. Did he open the Meatball shop?
I did. I opened up the Meatball shop.
That's wild.
And I did that in 2010, and it was, I don't know if you were in New York at that time, but it was insanity. I mean, it was like really, people were lining up for hours and hours to eat meatballs. And we ended up, the press loved us. I mean, we were cooking meatballs live on like Jimmy Fallon and Jay Leno and Chelsea Handler. And, we had done Good Morning America a bunch of times. It was really crazy. It was like a very, very surreal sort of experience for both my partner Dan and I. And we ended up opening up 5 restaurants, 5 more restaurants. So we had 6. By the time I sold my equity to the partners, or the majority of my equity, we had 6 restaurants. And then I opened up Seymour's, and I did the same thing with Seymour's. And so there was a point in time where, I had 13 restaurants in New York City. It was nuts.
How? I mean, could you breathe? I feel like sometimes days as an entrepreneur, and I have one agency, I'm like, oh my God, I can never let go of this. I can never vacation. And it's like, I almost feel like I don't have time for myself. I'm drowning. How did you have that many restaurants? Like, how are you feeling? Because I know obviously the public sees the positive, right? And the public sees your success. But did you ever feel like, I'm drowning, I don't want to do this anymore? Was there any like downside of that or being in that?
You know, it's so interesting. I write a newsletter every week to the community at Kreatures of Habit, you know, which is my digital brand. It's a wellness brand. And so my way of connecting with them is through this newsletter I write every week from my personal email address. I send it out to like 50,000 people. And last week's email was on that topic exactly. You know, coming up as an entrepreneur in New York, specifically in the world of restaurants, I didn't understand that there was a balance to being an entrepreneur. I really, like, when you first kick it off, you're like, at all costs, I'm going to make this work at all costs. So if that means that I have to work 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, and literally shut down all the other components of my life, that's what I'm going to do to make it work. And for the first 2 years, realistically, I did that. I did not take a day off. I worked 18 hours a day. It was insane, and it got so intense for me that I was dealing with so much stress, but I was so in it that I didn't really, I wasn't aware that my body was responding to this burnout in such a severe way until I had to get my wedding band cut off my finger because my hands got so swollen. Ow. My feet got so swollen. My body was just in absolute cortisol, fight or flight all the time. And it just wasn't healthy. And I'm a healthy guy. You know, my wife at the time took me aside about 2 years in, and she was like, hey, I love you. And I was like, I love you too. And she's like, it doesn't feel like that. You know, it doesn't feel like that. And I was like, wow, that was a real wake-up call for me, because I was just like, you know, in my mind I was like, I'm doing this for our family. You know, I know we want to have kids, and you know, and I'm like, I'm just kind of trying to build the machine so that there, you know, hopefully down the road there would be a moment in time where I could take my foot off the gas a little bit. But she really introduced a totally different aspect of it to me, which is basically my philosophy now, which is, if you're living to work, your life is going to suck. But if you're working to live, you've got a great shot at happiness. And now I work to live. I don't live to work anymore. So that means I've created real boundaries. There's not a doubt that yes, there's moments where I'm like, shit, I'm drowning, or oh man, we got to go raise some money, and it's not easy in this climate to raise money. And it feels like I'm knocking on doors and selling my soul sometimes. But at the end of the day, I really do shut it down at 6 o'clock every night without fail. I just won't do it. I won't work on the weekends anymore either, unless it's absolutely necessary.
On a Sunday.
That's true. I mean, yeah, you're right. Sorry,
I had to call you out
unless it's absolutely necessary though, in a normal time for me, I just don't. And you know, people will give me shit about that, right? They'll be like, "What do you mean you work 6 to 8 hours a day?" And I'm like, "Yep." Oh, what do you mean you take 3 vacations a year? I'm like, I do. Because I believe that if I'm an entrepreneur for 15 years, right? I'm still young. I've got a lot of runway ahead of me. But if I'm not able to take vacation without feeling guilty about it after running businesses for 15 years, I've done something terribly wrong. Terribly wrong. You know? Yeah. That's how I think about it.
I feel that. And I started my business because I wanted to, I guess, not separate work from my life. I was like, I want to build a model where I can do both and have it intertwined in my life, where I can travel while work. And now it just feel like, now that I have set that standard, I'm drowning because I can't detach. And if I try to detach, I feel like everything's going to go up in flames. How did did it happen overnight where you're like, I'm going to set these boundaries, or did you have to put some things in place to get there?
I mean, so a few things happened. I felt extreme burnout, physically impaired, you know, from how hard I was working and how unhealthy it was, the amount of hours I was working. And so that was, and then Donna, of course, taking me aside and being like, hey, like, this isn't going to work this way. So that was like the first moment where I was like, okay, I can start to figure out like how to make it so that my life is not only about work. And then I figured that out a little bit in the Meatball shop stuff. And then I opened up Seymour's, and I opened up Seymour, Finley, our first son was born in March of 2015. I opened up Seymour's in June. And then I went on the road to shoot a TV show in August. And so those three things backed up, like, and I was on the road for like a month, and then I'd be able to come back for like 3 days, and I had to like manage the restaurant, be with the kid and my wife. And I started to feel that like intensity again. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I know that these are all great things that are happening, but like this isn't like really sustainable, right? Like, and so I think realistically, from like it really took me until like 2018 to understand that, hey man, like you don't need to be everything all the time. Mm-hmm. You just don't. And like, you gotta let go a little bit. You just have to. And because you're still young. Like you've got like 40 years of business making ahead of you. It can't be like this. And so that's when I decided, that's when I said, okay, I'm going to figure out how to make it so that at least I don't work on the weekends anymore. In the restaurant world, it's hard to like close it at 6, because that's like the busiest part of the day is between 7 and 9, right? So like, but I said no more weekends, and then now, since Kreatures of Habit, I kicked off in 2021. I literally I'm at the dinner table every night at 6 o'clock. I do not work after 6. It's even weird for me to say that out loud, right? Because like I was always like the anti 9-to-5 guy, but I just don't. Yeah.
I resonate with that too, because I was like, I hate 9-to-5, and it's okay if I start my own business. I'll work all the time as long as I'm not working for somebody. Mm-hmm. And now I'm right there with you. I'm like, oh my God, I want to go back to the boundaries and the set working time.
But so what, like my kind of some of the messaging that I've been really like interested in putting out there is, just because you're an entrepreneur doesn't mean you shouldn't have those boundaries. Like, those boundaries were created for work-life balance, legit. Like, that is why starting at 9 and finishing at 5, you start at 9 so you can be with your family for breakfast in the morning, and then you finish at 5 so you can eat with your family at 6 o'clock at night, or whatever time you eat. Like, that's actually the purpose of that. And just because I'm an entrepreneur doesn't mean that I have to like completely obliterate these hard and fast rules that have been in the public for God knows 100 years, right? Yeah. And so I really do kind of try to stick to it, you know, and I chunk my day up into, you know, certain periods where there's periods where my assistant cannot ever schedule a call. Like, it's every day I've got a 2-hour block where it's just like, that is where I do the heavy duty focus work. Phone goes off, no meetings. There's a 3-hour period where I can get work done, but she can schedule meetings. There's from 4 to 5:30, I only will do calls. I won't do any Zooms or Google Meets where I go out for a walk and I take an 1.5-hour walk, and I can take calls. Another thing that I think is important to say is that, like, since the pandemic hit, you know, everybody went to these virtual meetings, and it's really nice to see people's faces. But at the end of the day, like, pre-pandemic, it was calls. Like, that's what we did. You got on a call. You know what I mean? It was a conference call. It's a phone call. You don't need to see my face. Yeah. So I will just say, hey, like, you guys can all stare at each other. I'm going to dial in so I can actually move my body and walk, you know. And I love, because now that I don't live in the city too, you know, walking is like, it has to be scheduled. It has to be intentional, because, you know, there's no like walking anywhere. Like, you have to drive everywhere. And so I intentionally schedule my steps every day, because it's super important to me to get that movement in.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Once everyone was starting to hop on the Google Hangout and Zooms, I was still having conference calls with my team, because I'm like, I don't want to be presentable and look at you. I don't even like to FaceTime people. And they just love it because they want to interact with each other. We're remote, and I'm like, okay, I guess we can. But yeah, I'm like, I'll just take a regular phone call. I don't need to get all done up and stare at you. And
I think that there's, I mean, I probably have anywhere from 3 to 5 of those a day still.
It's draining.
It's a lot, but
Yeah.
and so I do think that there's a time and a place for the virtual stuff, but honestly, like it is distracting, in my opinion, right? Like if you're just on a call and you can just get the thing done and, you know, get it done. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to be in front of a computer with the perfect Wi-Fi to make sure that your screen, you know, like it's added weight for a super heavy lifestyle in general, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And then the 3 Zooms, your day's over. You're like, what did I do today?
Right.
I spoke to 3 people. There's nothing coming out of those meetings really. It's just, it's a time sucker, I feel. So did you come up with Creatures of Habit while you were upstate? How did that come about?
So Creatures of Habit is a really interesting story. So I knew I had sold a bunch of my equity at Seymour's. Kind of my, I guess you would say, MO as an entrepreneur is I love the creative component of entrepreneurship. I love coming up with the idea, building a team around it, gaining momentum, getting people excited, raising money, designing it, and bringing it to life. Like that's what I love to do, creating environments and atmospheres and now products for people to be stoked. And so I did it with Meatball Shop. I ran it for 5 years, sold a bunch of equity. Because if it's successful, once it gets to a certain point, the job description of the CEO or the founder changes dramatically. It's like not about hand-to-hand combat, being in there, working with people. For me in the restaurant world, it became way more about like real estate deals, managing construction crews, and designers, because we were always building a new place. And that only gets worse and worse and worse as you scale in the world of restaurants, right? Because like if you have a scalable restaurant concept, everybody just wants to see more and more and more. And your value begins to shrink as you slow down. So if you're not consistently building, even the valuation of the actual business that you have that's great is shrinking because everybody's like, okay, so what's the plan for the future, you know? So I kind of came to the conclusion that I'm gonna be a 0 to like 5 unit, 6 unit person, and then bring somebody in that's an expert at going from like 6 to 60.
Okay.
I did that with Meatball Shop, and then I did the same thing with Seymour's, and I began to think through the next brand for me. Habits are a massive part of my life. I was an addict for a long time. I was an addict for 11 years, from like 12 to 23, and it was a really dark time. I don't regret a minute of it. I'm grateful for it, but like my habits almost killed me. And as soon as I made the decision to get sober, these guys kind of came into my life and they taught me that like habits aren't bad, but there's a big difference between good and bad ones. You know, like habits are a double-edged sword. They could be great or they could be terrible. And when we think of the word habit, most people immediately think of bad, right? Like people aren't like, oh man, I got this great habit. People are like, oh God, I got to kick this habit. So I wanted to kind of create something that painted a better picture of habits, because habits really have created the life I live today, which is honestly awesome. And so I created a brand called Creatures of Habit. I was going to launch it with a restaurant. And this is like right before the pandemic. I found this amazing restaurant, and I was going to build this wellness restaurant. And in New York, there's lots of like wellness lunch spots where you can go and have like a super healthy meal, like a Sweet Green or something like that. But when it comes to dinner time, there's not that many great healthy options that have a vibe. Like the healthy restaurants in New York City are like hippie restaurants, They're like, they look like healthy restaurants, they smell like healthy restaurants. Like you look inside and it looks like only healthy people eat there. And I wanted to kind of change that. I wanted to create like a wellness healthy spot with a vibe that was like a full service restaurant. And then instead of scaling the restaurant model, I was going to use the restaurant as sort of like an incubator for a line of consumer packaged goods, because I really wanted to get into CPG, because I knew that I just didn't want to scale restaurants anymore. So I came up with this great concept, awesome menu, found the location, and then about 2 weeks before we were going to sign the lease, everything shit to bed with COVID. And so I had to rethink, and that's when we decided that we were going to move upstate. I actually hired an executive coach to work with me, because I didn't know that I didn't think that it was like possible for me to just like launch a business in a totally new industry. I thought in my mind that I was like, dude, I'm a restaurateur. I know how to do that really well. Can I just do it in another medium? And this woman that I hired, who's amazing, she was able to convince me that it has nothing to do with the restaurant. Like, it's all about your ability to create. And so you can create and create community, which is ultimately, I think, what drives all business, in any medium you want. So, like, you want to open up a wellness CPG, packaged good business, go for it. And I was like, all right, fuck it, that's it, we're off. And the way I came up with our hero product, which is called Meal One, it's this overnight, high protein overnight oatmeal, is because when I got sober, these two guys that came into my life that introduced me to the better habits that I sort of implement in my life today, they gave me this plan. And they basically said, this is what we want you to do. And if you can do these things every day, your chances of like happiness and success are far greater than if you try to do it on your own or obviously go back to using drugs and drinking. So they basically said, we want you to wake up as early as you can every single day. And we want you to go into the bathroom and brush your teeth, floss your teeth, put your contacts on, and wash your face. And for me, honestly, at that point, like, that was a lot. Because I just didn't care. I was waking up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to go to work at 5 because I was a bartender. Mm-hmm. And they were like, then take a piss, and then we want you to get on your knees and ask God for help. And I was like, ask God for help? I'm like, what are you talking about? And they were like, look, do it if you, like, these are the suggestions that we're giving you, It doesn't have to be any God that you know of God as today. It could be anything, but just know that you're not the one that's making the calls. Like, if you think that you are in charge of everything, which is how you've been living your life, trying to control every feeling, every emotion, you're going to end up right back where you were. So just start asking for help, because you need to ask for fucking help, dude. Like, you don't know how to ask for help. So if you start in the morning in a humble position asking for help, it's going to open up the help doorways for you. So they were like, get on your knees and ask God for help to stay sober, do some push-ups, put on some sneakers, and go out for a walk or a jog. It could be a block, it could be 10 miles, whatever it is. As soon as you get back, make yourself a big fat bowl of oatmeal, because we want to give you something easy, accessible, healthy, satiating, that you can just easily make. And so that's when I started eating oatmeal every morning. And then they said, we want you to go to an AA meeting after that, and then come meet us at the gym, and we're going to work with you and teach you how to move your body in a much more healthy way than you have been moving your body. And then you're going to have chicken and broccoli for lunch. You're going to take a nap. You're going to go to work. You're going to have chicken and broccoli for dinner, and you're going to go to bed as early as you can, and that's going to be your life. And I was like, I'll give it a shot. And I literally live my life like that to this day. I mean, that's kind of what I do. Yeah. And so I've been eating oatmeal, and I've made my own sort of like oatmeal concoction over the years. But when I was thinking about Creatures of Habit, I was like, what is the one thing that I feel like I can stand behind 100%, that I've been fueling my body with for, at that point, I guess it was like 16 years. Like, what is it? Like, what? And I was like, oh my God, it's been sitting in front of it's my fucking oatmeal. Like, yeah. I make this amazing oatmeal concoction every morning. It takes me 25 minutes. What if I was able to just like package it and then get my supplements into it as well? So if I was able to package like my supplement stack, which is omega-3s, probiotic, digestive enzymes, and vitamin D3, if I can get those things into this high protein oatmeal in a pouch that made it easy for people to make, not only am I selling my like number one favorite nutritional habit that can get people going in a positive way to kickstart their day, but I could tell my story, which is what I'm doing with you right now, and that's what I've done.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it ties back, to the beginning, and I think everything that you're doing all sort of ties back, right?
It does.
The restaurant business, and so I find that really interesting that you didn't have the product before the name and the idea. Like, you had an overarching idea and then came up with what it was after.
Yeah, I think I was kind of forced. I was like forced to do that, right? Like, I knew that I loved the name Creatures of Habit for the restaurant brand, would I have named a restaurant concept Creatures of Habit? Not necessarily, but I did know that down the road there was going to be this CPG piece. And I think Creatures of Habit for CPG, and for anybody listening that doesn't know what CPG is, it's consumer packaged goods. It's anything that you would buy at a supermarket. in a package that is nutritional. That's food, right? Or it could be anything that's in a package, but in my case, it's nutrition. Like if you go to Erewhon, that's all CPG. Everything there outside of the fresh produce. But I thought that would be a really cool name for a products company because it doesn't pigeonhole me into any one specific product, right? Like if it was Meal One Oatmeal, if that's what I called the business, like I'd be stuck with oatmeal. And that's kind of what happened with Meatball Shop, honestly. Like we called it Meatball Shop, and if you're not in the mood for meatballs, like you're not going there. You know what I mean? So I wanted to create a name that was kind of somewhat vague, but would give me an opportunity to create products that would all tie to this idea that like, hey, like nutritional habits are super important for happiness, and if I can make that process easier for you, like eat this, not that, don't worry, like stop thinking about your first meal of the day, like I got it, it's like the perfect thing to put into your body in the beginning of the day. For busy people, for athletic people, for people that move, it's like it's a no-brainer,
Yeah, I agree. And I do like the name. It's very
Thanks.
catchy. Yeah. So you have opened restaurants, you have Kreatures of Habit. Did you grow up wanting to be a CEO or founder, entrepreneur?
I think I have always had the curiosity, discovery gene. I'm like a super curious person. I always have been. When I was a little kid, 5 years old, I grew up on 87th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue. If I had a toy that I didn't want to play with anymore, I would literally like gather them. I would ask my older sister to come downstairs with me. I'd lay out a sheet in front of my building and I'd sell my toys for $1. I would like go into the comic book or baseball card shop when I was like 10, 11. That was down the street from me. I'd buy a bunch of packs and I would keep the cards that I wanted, and then I would stand in front of the card shop and try to sell cards for $0.25. Like I was like always thinking about like how I can make, do, create, sell things. And so I do think that I was sort of born with this like inherent desire to want to move. And so I do. I think that I've always sort of had that,
And when you were working at other people's restaurants or as a bartender, like at what point were you like, I need my own restaurant? What was that turning point?
Yeah, I mean, so like full transparency, when I was using drugs, and I mean, I was also like deep in the world of selling drugs. So I was like, there was this sort of like business component to that lifestyle for me. When I finally got sober, about a year after I got sober, I came to the conclusion that like I love this business. I love, like if people ask me like, what is your greatest skill set or what is your superpower if you had to call one out? And for me, it's just the ability to connect with humans at scale, anywhere, anytime. You can put me in the Amazon or at the White House and I'm gonna make friends, like just like what I love to do. I like, it like wakes me up in the morning. And so, I think about a year after I got sober, I was like, this is what I have to do. I have to do this. And so I took my boss. I was working at the same restaurant, like I got hired at a restaurant when I was 20 called Frank in the East Village. And Frank was basically one of the guys that kind of came to the rescue. He wasn't one of the two guys that wrote that plan for me, but I had slept through work for the umpteenth time. And he was like, Mikey, I love you, man. Like, I love you. Everybody loves you. But you're dying. And we all know you're dying. Like, we can't, I refuse to watch you die on my watch. You're fired. Like, that's it. It's over. You're done. And I begged him for my job back because that was, like, the only thing really tethering me to, like, any, like, life, right? That job. And I was allowed to, I definitely was never sober there. But that's the restaurant business, unfortunately, right? Like it's like a real epidemic in the world of restaurants and hospitality where people are like, abusers of substance. And I begged him for my job, and he basically said, look, dude, if you show up here at 8 o'clock in the morning for the next month and you clean the restaurant with the porters and you get sober, I'll consider giving you a job back in the restaurant. But as it stands right now, like that's what I'm willing to do. And that's what he did. That's what I did. I got sober, and I cleaned the restaurant. He didn't make me do it for 30 days. But about a year after I got sober, I asked if I can sit down with him, and I said, hey man, like, can I sit down with you for a cup of coffee? I want to talk to you about something. And he said, yeah, sure. And I was like, I want to open up my own place. And I guess I was 25 at that time. And I think I had like, well, no, it wasn't then. Donna, who my wife now was my girlfriend. I met her 8 months after I got sober. But like, I was in love with this person. I was in love with her, and I had this feeling that she's my person. Mm-hmm. And so when I felt that, I was like, I've got to build a family, like a much better situation than I had. And the only way for me to do that is not to bartend or bar manage. It's to like do what I know I'm capable of doing, which is opening my own business. And so I said to Frank, I was like, hey man, like I really want to do this. And he looked at me and he was like, Mikey, I just don't know if you got it in you. Like, I don't know. I don't know if you have what it takes. And this guy had watched me go from like a kid to like now starting to become somewhat of a man. And he did that purposefully because I was bummed out, right? And I left. I turned around and I left the meeting. And then before I walked, I went to his apartment. Before I walked out, he goes, but if you are really serious, you should go to culinary school. That would be my suggestion. And that night, I applied to culinary school. And from 25 to 27, I went to culinary school. I got a degree in culinary arts and restaurant management. And from 27 to 28, I wrote a business plan for the Meatball shop. And I put that business plan in front of every regular at Frank Restaurant. And 14 of those regulars wrote me a check to open up my first business.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I have chills. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that was the beginning of like, that was the beginning of the journey.
And he almost like flipped a switch.
He did.
Like, you can't do it. You're like, fucking watch me.
and that's exactly right. And it's so funny now, like, so he saw me like kind of open a Meatball shop and then like really come out the gate strong. And he saw how well we did with press, because PR in New York City for restaurants specifically it's a very different game, but then it was very important. It was just super important because it is the Wild West. I mean, there's 25,000 restaurants in New York City, right? And so like it's hard to stand out. And if you have something cool that people would be like are excited about, and you got a good story. I mean, our story is good. Daniel and I grew up together. We got our first restaurant jobs together. He went out to California to work in all the fancy fine dining restaurants. I stayed in New York, fucking my life up for the first number of years, but then got sober and like really built a network of people in this downtown New York City kind of cool guy scene. And we came together, and we've always had a dream of opening a restaurant together. I dragged him back from California, and we did it. And our publicist loved it, and he took a chance on us, and it really worked. It really worked. It's kind of crazy, but
I mean, yeah, I'm like, I know the restaurant. I had no idea when you were coming on. I was like, the Meatball shop? Like, what? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you guys killed it. You did an amazing job, and I'm sure you had a lot of organic press and lovers, and yeah, and that was only the beginning. Yeah. And as you're opening everything and you're starting new businesses, do you get the itch to keep creating and starting more?
I do.
I feel that. Like, it never ends, right?
Well, I think, so for me right now where I'm at, the cool thing about Kreatures of Habit is, it's so aligned with my personal passion for wellness, right? Like, what really ended up saving my life when I made the decision to change was fitness. Like, obviously sobriety and that community, but like really fitness was, I needed to sink my teeth into something that just made me feel accomplished, that made me feel good, that made me feel like I was winning. And that's what fitness did for me and does for me on a daily basis. Like literally, it is, I think everybody should, have a life of movement. I really do. But for people in recovery, we're like, we need wins, controllable wins. Because when we were out there, if something sucked, you drank. Oh shit, I just won. If something was awesome, you drank. I double one. You know, like you're controlling the emotions all the time. When you remove that, you're left with like life. And life doesn't always lend itself to winning. You know what I mean? So what I found was that no matter what, I can control wins on a daily basis through fitness and nutrition. If I like am conscious about what I put into my body, it's a win. If I move my body in a hard way on a regular basis every day, it's a win. And those two things have been sort of like the cornerstones of my happiness and success. Of course, my family, but like those things are really what keep me on the beam, you know. And so with Creatures of Habit, it's just so aligned. Like it is literally an extension of me. Whereas the restaurant ends up taking a life of its own. Creatures of Habit really is an extension of me. And so the cool thing about it is that I can like create new products that have been habits for me nutritionally for a long time, and then slowly just drop them into the funnel, you know. And so I feel like every time I make a new product, so we have Meal One, which is the overnight high protein overnight oats. We dropped a really cool sleep support hot chocolate, so it's melatonin free, like unbelievably delicious. It's like a sweet tooth quencher at night. It's got like a nice sort of like richness to it, but it really does help you relax, fall, and stay asleep like an hour before bed. It's called Nightcap. So we dropped that. The next thing we're going to do is a really clean like protein bar that you're going to feel good about eating on a regular basis, because most protein bars are filled with shit. Yeah. So like these things give me that sort of, they fulfill that desire to want to create. And I could see myself really running Creatures of Habit for, you know, a bit here. Like I think I've got this time frame in my mind, like 2008 Q2 is kind of like where I've set my target on. So I've got whatever that is, 4 years to smash it. But I get that fulfillment with Creatures of Habit because I'm able to work on new products. We also make fun apparel, so I get to create that way too, you know.
Yeah, you can add whatever you want to it.
It's
your brand. Yeah, that's the best part. You're like, okay, I have this company, this brand, and I can just add products. And I think, you know, who does a great job at that is Lauren Bostic with her, the ice roller. And she keeps adding stuff that she has loved and wanted to make her own product, but better, or what works for her. And so, yeah, I think that's cool. So when you get that itch, or you just have that moment, something comes to you, you're like, let's do it. You go straight to action too, don't you?
I do, and you know, it's funny. So my business partner, Meatball Shop, lives out here. And after Meatball Shop, he and I had like a 4-year period of time where we needed a break from each other, and it was tough. Like we did not have a good relationship towards the end of the Meatball Shop. It you know, and it's public knowledge. I mean, it was rough, the two of us, like two best friends in business when real money is involved. I mean, it was like real money with the Meatball Shop, you know, and we made some major mistakes, like massive, millions and millions of dollars mistakes. But I wouldn't change it, honestly. Like I don't regret it. But the two of us needed like a break from each other, and there was and he's my brother. But we didn't speak for 4 years unless it was absolutely necessary. In 2019, we changed that, and now we're like as best friends as you can be. But I was just with him right before I got here, and I stay with him and his brother when I'm here, and we were talking about that specifically. Like, I think there is a certain type of person that has the sort of fearlessness or the fear of creating business doesn't register like it does for other people. Like I am never scared to build a business. Like it's not like, oh man, like what if this doesn't work? In my mind, I'm like, there's absolutely no way this thing fails. And I'm not afraid of failure because I've kind of like run to it as hard as I can, and I've definitely failed. But I think just like my general position in life is just like obscene optimism. And some people will be like, dude, like there is a dark side or there is a downside. And I'm like, yeah, I understand that. But like, what's the fucking point of like, there's a story that I love this story. I was told this story a long time ago that I think is just so powerful for anything, right? But someone told me this story about an old man and his grandson, and they were sitting around a fire, and the old man said to his grandson, he said, there's a war inside of you all the time, a war between two wolves. And one of the wolves is positivity and optimism and happiness and confidence and security. And the other wolf is fear and doubt and insecurity and negativity. And he's like, they're at odds constantly all the time. They're always fighting. And the grandson said, Grandpa, so like there's always a war? Doesn't somebody win or lose at some point? He's like, who wins the war? And the grandfather looks at his grandson and says, the one you feed most. Mm-hmm. And like that for me is like, that's just right. What you spend more of your energy focusing on is ultimately what is going to come to fruition. And so I choose to be the one in the company that's just like, we win no matter what, period. That's what we do. We just win. And if it could take a day or it could take 10 years, but we're going to fucking win. And I'm not going to stop until we cross the finish line. And that's it, and now because I have this balance where I'm able to, like, I shut it down at 6 o'clock unless it's absolutely necessary to stay online. Like, I shut it down, and it gives me that time to, like, also be me and come back to work the next morning just ready to crush life. And I really do think that that's like a lot of smart people. I'm not a smart guy. I'm like an emotionally kind of intelligent guy, creative guy. I'm surrounded by a lot of smart people, but the smart people tend to really think about a lot of the what if, like the what ifs, and not the best way. They're like, well, you got to think about, this could, and I'm like, yep, I hear you. It could, you know what I mean? Like, sure.
It's so true.
Yeah.
It really is so true. I mean, I even, with myself, I struggled in college, and it wasn't because I wasn't intelligent. It was because I didn't care. Mm-hmm. And then when I started my business and it was successful, and I realized I didn't even think about it. I just sort of like let the journey take me. And I looked back at myself struggling through college and high school in my early 20s, and I was like, I get it now, because the smart people aren't entrepreneurs, they're not. It's just not a space for them.
I think you have to have a level of optimism and a like sort of almost unparalleled ability to withstand stress and not let it tank you.
That's so true. I've never been stressed. Even when my team is like, how are you never stressed? And I say, well, what will that do for me?
Right.
It's just going to make things worse and bring more negativity into my life. Something bad happens, great. I know the universe is doing it for me, not to me.
I say to the team regularly, we thrive in negative situations. Like, we thrive. That is like our sweet spot. When shit's not going well, we all step up, and that's where we crush. Negative people sink the ship. Sink the ship. Like, you put a negative person in a negative situation and you are in big trouble. Like, just big trouble, right? Like, imagine being at war and like the commander, knows that there's shit going down in front of us that could very well take us all out, right? If that person was like, we're all gonna die, everybody would be like, later. Like, nobody wants to hear that. Everybody wants to hear, we're gonna get like that. Like, I feel like that is the characteristics of most entrepreneurs that are out there putting the right foot in front of the left and, paying attention to what's going on, but understanding that, like, yeah, we still got to move. Like, we still got to go. Like, you cannot let the P&L freeze you in time. If you're running your business solely on a P&L, like, you're in trouble, Like, there's a human component to every single business. And a piece of paper that says like 17 plus 89 is whatever could make sense on the piece of paper, but there's so many variables. There's so many, strings you can pull to actually, make it equal what you want it to equal. And I believe that,
I do too. And I wonder if this resonates with you, but Have you ever had a year of growing pains?
Oh, last
year. I feel
year.
like I'm in a year of growing pains, and I don't know how, like, where it's just the universe is tossing so much at me that I'm like always challenged, and the drowning, and I'm like, I think it's a growing pains, like a growing year.
Mm-hmm.
And what was your next year like? Like, what was your growing pain, and then what did the next year? Did it lead to blessings and all good things?
Well, last year was a really hard year. Last year, we had planned early in the year to raise another round of funding. And it was not easy for me to raise the first round of funding for Creatures of Habit, but it was a lot easier than last year. Last year was a slog. It was like really hard. And I could not raise the money. Like, nobody was deploying cash. Everybody went from this like sort of burn and beg philosophy, or at least that's what I call it, where like you have a company and you spend a lot of money to acquire customers, and you spend way too much money, and then you beg for more from your investors. And a lot of investors, that was like expected. They'd be like, all right, well, they're growing, you know, they're not making money, they're in the hole, but like we're going to keep them afloat. We're going to keep them afloat because we believe in this thing. Investors shifted from that mindset or that philosophy to, if you're not profitable or have a very clear and concise pathway to profitability, we're not putting any money into your business because you're going to fail. And so that was sort of what was happening last year. And it was super tough. Like, I was, you know, I felt like a door-to-door salesman. I mean, that's kind of what it was. I met so many people, trying to convince them that what I was doing was an impactful thing. And then, you know, it got to the point where it was like very, very scary, where like I was like to my partner Jonathan, I was like, dude, like this could be it. You know, this totally could be it. We might have to fold this thing up. But I just continued to push. I just continued to push and continued to push, and I wouldn't give up, and I wouldn't take no for an answer, and I just kept going. And I think that was like an amazing experience for me to go through, because it was fucking stressful as hell. But it just continued to cement this idea that I have like a no matter what mindset. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop. And then sure enough, I met Lance Armstrong. Lance Armstrong loved what I was doing, threw some money in, introduced me to his buddy who threw a lot of money in. And now we're in an unbelievable place. So
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Like you're drowning, stressed out.
Yeah, well,
and then Lance Armstrong.
Lance Armstrong literally like rode into the picture, and became not only a great friend, but like he believes in what I'm doing. He believes in me as an entrepreneur. I think another thing that I would just say for anybody listening who is an entrepreneur, who's an aspiring entrepreneur, like just understand that like most investors, most investors, maybe when you get to private equity or like, you know, but like most angel investors, venture capitalists, they are really banking on the jockey, on the entrepreneur. You can have the greatest product of all time. If the VC or the angel doesn't think that you're the right operator, you're not getting the money, right? Like they really do invest in the humans and the team. And, you know, look, at the end of the day, like who thinks that a high protein overnight oatmeal is going to turn into a $500 million business, right? I can point to a number of businesses that have done that with, you know, things, but really these investors have put their money down on the table in me. And my job now is to go out there and sell my dream to as many people as I can. And so anybody listening, just know that like you're the one that the majority of these people are investing in, not the product or the service, you know. And that's an important thing to understand. So like when you go in for those investor meetings, don't be fake and phony. Don't pretend to be someone you're not. The truth always comes out. Be who the fuck you are. And you should have a story too. You know, like you shouldn't just create a product or a service or a business just because you think it would be something that people would want to buy. There should be a story attached to it, because businesses with mission and story, people will participate just on that alone, you know, just on that alone.
Yeah, no, that is really true. And so you're saying that they connect with you as a person.
Totally.
And yeah. And you have to just emotionally be attached to. There has to be a reason. And I think in LA right now, everybody is a business. And I've never saw that in New York City. Everyone's climbing the corporate ladder. I moved to LA and I'm like, everyone is starting a business. What I didn't see is like the reason. I think that they just wanted an easy way out. They wanted easy money. So I think a lot of people are starting businesses and just thinking, I'm going to start it and I'm going to be an overnight success. And I mean, I've seen a lot of businesses fail.
Yeah.
With you, I do want to touch on, I took a look at your social media. And you do pretty well with what you're putting out there. And you've created I feel like you've turned yourself into a brand, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely that piece started to happen when I launched the Meatball shop. And there was a lot of media. And I just, like, in media felt super comfortable. Like, the cameras never made me nervous. Live TV didn't ever, like, shake my bones. I didn't freeze up. And I started to realize that, like, hey, like, I could do media too. Like, I enjoy it. Like, I feel good. It gives me an opportunity to, like, talk about my businesses, or at that time, my business. You know, I mean, it was that was all I was put on TV to do. And so that just became, like, another component of my life, this personal brand. And so, I don't know, you know, whatever it was, 14 years ago, I really started to do that. And I was making content and shooting content about fitness and cooking and, like, just talking to the camera about, like, things that I had learned and believe in. And then other brands sort of identified me as someone that they thought would be a great person to have talk about their brands. And so I started doing that. And you know, and that was like another revenue stream for me, for my life. And so now I kind of have this business, which, you know, full transparency, takes me a day a month, where I shoot a ton of content. And I have brands that I use in my everyday life. Like, I work with like 9 brands. And my prerequisite for the brands are, it's got to be something that I'm going to use every single day. I will not use a product that is not interesting for me every single day. Because if I use it every single day, it's super easy for me to make content around it, right? Like, it's just like there all the time, right? Like, I could just take a picture of it and be like, love this shit, you know, and share it. And so that's the massive prerequisite. And then, of course, it has to be a wellness product, because anything, like these days, I'm very cautious about what I put into my body. And so, you know, I've been lucky to be able to do that on, like, a super consistent basis. And yeah, I love that part of my business too, because it's cool for me. It's cool for Creatures of Habit, because I work with these brands that are totally aligned with Creatures of Habit, because they're all wellness brands. I get in front of their audience. Their audience then finds me and my businesses. They get in front of my audience. So they're like, it's just like a total harmonious kind of way of, like, enhancing everything I'm doing. You know?
You're doing a great job,
Thanks.
especially talking to the camera, connecting with people, not being overly curated or aesthetic. And I see that you do a little bit of everything. You're cooking, you're in your car talking, and it sounds like sometimes stories come to mind for you and you want to share because you're bringing value through that story. There's just a little bit of everything. So I just want to say
Thanks.
you're doing an amazing job.
I appreciate that.
I see you on TikTok too. Took people a long time, if you're not Gen Z, to hop on TikTok and see why TikTok is so important.
Yeah, we were like, we went kind of hard on TikTok. Like, we chose a lane, a very specific lane on TikTok. And, you know, we just started, like, doing that. And I've kind of fallen off a little bit, if I'm being honest. Like, I'm normally very, very consistent. But, yeah, I mean, I do focus the majority of my social media energy on Instagram, because that's really what the brands have been, like, they ask for. You know, I think TikTok is a great brand awareness play, but it's not like a super successful conversion platform. You know, people convert on Instagram and Facebook, but more Instagram. You know?
Yeah, brands are wanting to appeal to Gen Z. So I do feel like they're taking their marketing dollars and they're going to TikTok. But for me, I'm like, you're spending thousands of dollars on a post that's just going to be pushed down in a day with how much people are posting.
Yeah.
But that's where we're headed.
I do think it's great. I do think it's great for awareness. There's no doubt, right? Like, you know, we've like for Creatures of Habit, we dabble in TikTok, but you know, I've also just like totally reworked our whole marketing strategy for Creatures of Habit too, where I think like, you really do need to be everywhere all the time in the world of digital sales. Like you just do, you know, it can't just be paid media anymore. And a lot of people spend tons of money on paid media because it's so clear what the ROI is, what the return on investment is. You spend the money and you see how many people are converting. And it's like, this is it. I spend this, I get this back. It's clear as day. Like there's no sort of having to look for it. In other marketing channels, like influencer, email, like other ways, it's so much harder to sort of see the real attribution. So people shy away from it, especially the smart guys. You know, they're just like, we don't know if that's working. In my mind, I'm like, hey, I know that if somebody sees an Instagram ad, that's the first touch point. Great. Then somebody listens to our podcast. We have a Creatures of Habit podcast. Somebody tells them about the Creatures of Habit podcast. Oh, they're going to Creatures of Habit podcast. In the Creatures of Habit podcast, the only thing I advertise is Creatures of Habit Meal 1 and Nightcap. So that's another touch point. Word of mouth, somebody has it at an event. You know, I just did an event here on Saturday. Oh, maybe that person saw an ad. Maybe they listened to a podcast. But then they see it on an event. And they're like, oh, my God, I know that stuff. And then, boom, later on that night, it shows up again on Instagram as an ad. And they're like, wait a second, this is that stuff's starting to look cool to me. And then boom, all of a sudden, you know, the next day they somehow get an email or somebody talks to them. So I really do think that there needs to be these multiple touch points, because it's rare that you see an Instagram ad and you're like, boop, sold. You know what I mean? Like there's definitely way more that goes into it. And those other ways that are really, really hard to say, okay, I spent this money on that and this is how much money I got back for it. I think you have to be risky and you have to be willing to just say like, okay, we're going to try to be everywhere all the time and we're not going to spend all the money on paid social media. We're going to spread it out because I think that is what's going to lift. Like, you know, like influencer, right? Like it's so hard to, you know, like if somebody saw something that somebody that they follow is posting about, it doesn't mean that they necessarily bought it right then and there. But when they got an Instagram ad down the road, 2 weeks after they saw their favorite influencer post about it, then they pushed the buy now button. It really did come from the influencer, but it's so hard to track that, you know?
I know. And a lot of brands, they think, oh, as soon as the influencer posts, then I have to have that sale. It could be, especially with fashion, you know, it could be months down the road and they remember the brand. And I always try to, brands, I love brands, you know, they pay me, they fund my company essentially, but they have no strategy. There's zero strategy. I see them just throwing money to influencers. They don't have a strategy. They're like, oh, she looks cute, he looks cool. That's the downfall, because then they're wasting so much money. Yeah,
I think in influencer specifically, I think influencer, like the pay to play is a mistake. And if you're not locking in like a 6-month contract, you might as well kiss your money goodbye, because most people need to see something a number of times. And so if you've got an influencer that you really believe is a great representation of your brand, and you pay them and you expect that, there are those unicorns that are able to convert like that. There are. I've worked with them. I mean, Gary Vee's an investor in my business. Every time I do something with Gary on Creatures, you know, we'll sell like $45,000 in subscriptions in 30 minutes, you know, because he has that kind of like unicorn style capability. But that's like the 1%. You know, the majority, like it takes time for their audience to see it multiple times in order to say, you know what, I've been thinking about this. I'm going to do it. Fuck it. I'm going to give it a shot, you know.
I wish there were more brands like you.
Well, look, you know,
like,
I had to learn.
We'll do a one-off, and just, you know, if there's success from the one-off, then maybe we'll move into a longer-term partnership. And I'm like, one post one reel, one TikTok is not going to generate the sales that you're looking for.
Totally.
The consumer needs to consistently see the influencer using the product, talking about the product, organically sharing the product.
Yeah, and that's also, and I think I kind of have I'm in a bit of a lucky situation because I live on the other side of the coin as well.
Yeah.
Right? When I'm talking to brands and they're like, hey, we want to work with you, I'm like, great. Just know, like, I have zero interest in a one-off thing. I have zero interest in a month trial. I'm like, if you want to do it, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna give it my all. I'm not a sales guy for you. I'm a brand awareness guy that's gonna hope over time to not only bring awareness to your brand, but ultimately generate revenue. But it's gonna take 3 to 6 months. Like, that's what it does, you know? And if you can't get down with that, all good. I get it. I get it because I live I'm also a founder. But when I negotiate deals with influencer, I'm like, it's gotta be a minimum 6 months. And after 6 months, we take the temp. And if there's no conversion, you know, and I don't even tell them to post their promo codes. I'm like, you do it every once in a while, but like really what I want you to do is like, I don't want you to sell this product. I want you to fucking use it and like share about your experience. That's what I want you to do. And if you use it and don't love it, I'm gonna know, and it's you know, it doesn't make sense. So like, use it, love it, have it around you, and then snap a couple of shots, talk about it every once in a while, like do a reel, you know, like do something that's like really authentic. And that is ultimately what sells shit. Really, it does, you know.
Love it. It's so true. No, because I mean, honestly, there's very few brands that understand that concept. And they have, and again, they have no strategy. For you, I can tell you're looking for influencers and content creators that make sense for your brand. They're in wellness. They're already posting content like that. A lot of brands are just like, oh, you know, I like that influencer, or like, we'll just grab a list, and there's no strategy behind it. And then they end up failing, and a lot of these businesses are going under. And I'm like, none of you have a marketing strategy. You have some money and you're just paying random influencers that make zero sense for your brand.
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, like that didn't come like totally naturally to me, right? Like I had to make some bad bets, you know, to like learn and be like, damn, that sucked. But yeah, that's kind of where I kind of sit in the world of influencer. I do think influencer is a very powerful tool.
If you do it right.
If you do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This
For
was
sure.
an awesome Sunday conversation. I enjoyed hearing your story and all of your value.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was asking some questions for me too. I'm actually curious about your growing pains. Tell me. So I know this will resonate with my audience as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Until next time, y'all.